All right, guys. So today for Monday's writing, we're going to be focusing on writing and learning about fairy tales. So all throughout this week, we're going to be writing each day a different type of genre in writing. So fairy tales, mystery, personal narratives, a review like a Yelp review. We're going to be working on that this week, but today we're focusing on fairy tales. So we are going to read a fairy tale, and then we're going to come up with some of the parts and some of the things of what do you find in a fairy tale. And then you guys are actually going to write your own fairy tale in your daily writing journal. So I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to work on this fairy tale. So this fairy tale is Cinderella. Some of you guys have heard of Cinderella before. So this is what we're going to be reading today. Now remember, when I'm reading it, think of some of the elements or some of the details that really shout out to you that like, oh, this is a fairy tale. Definitely. Once upon a time, that's always a good way to start a fairy tale. There was a young girl named Cinderella. After her mother died, her father married another woman who had two daughters of her own. The two girls were lazy and selfish. Cinderella was kind and beautiful, but her stepmother did not like her. When Cinderella's father died, the stepmother made Cinderella do all the chores in the house. Cinderella worked very hard. Her clothes turned to rags and she had to sleep in the broom closet. One day, a royal, so kings, queen, princesses, princes, arrived. He brought a letter that said all of the young ladies in the kingdom were invited to a ball. Two stepsisters were very excited. They were going to meet the prince. So that's another big thing of fairy tales. Princes, princesses. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters went to the ball, but she could not go. She had no clothes to wear. Cinderella was so sad. But then her fairy godmother appeared. So fairy tale, fairy godmother, that's important. That's another thing we can find in a fairy tale. The fairy turned Cinderella's rags into a beautiful dress with glass slippers. She turned a pumpkin into a fancy coach with footmen. Cinderella could go to the ball. Her fairy godmother gave her one warning. When the clock struck midnight, the spell, so magic, would be broken and all of her nice things would disappear. Cinderella went to the ball and everyone thought she was very beautiful. Her stepmother and stepsisters did not recognize her because of the change in her clothing. The prince danced with Cinderella all night long. She had such a lovely time. She didn't even notice it was getting late, very late. The clock began to strike at 12, and Cinderella raced from the palace. She was in such a hurry she never told the prince her name. While she was rushing down the castle steps, Cinderella lost one of her glass slippers. The prince wanted to find Cinderella, but she had disappeared. All he could find was her glass slipper. That night, Cinderella's stepsisters told her all about the ball. They didn't realize she was the mysterious stranger who had danced with the prince. Cinderella kept her visit a secret. The prince made a promise. I will marry the girl who fits that slipper. He sent his duke to every house in the land. Every young lady had to try on the slipper. The duke came to Cinderella's house. One stepsister tried on the slipper. Her feet were too big. One sister tried on the slipper. Her feet were too big also. The duke was about to leave when Cinderella came into the room. May I please try on the slipper? She asked. It fit. Cinderella's stepsisters were so angry. She was going to be a princess. The prince and Cinderella left her home and the mean stepmother and stepsisters. Cinderella and the prince were soon married and lived happily ever after. So that happily ever after is a big part of fairy tales. The end. So let's go back and think of some of those elements or things that we find in a fairy tale that you can also put in your fairy tale when you're writing, okay? So I'm going to, let's see, share screen. There we go. All right, so we should see this right now. What do we find in a fairy tale? And I will put this up for us. So one thing was how it started. The book started once upon a time. Once upon a time. That's how it started. So I'm going to put starts. How did it end? So it ended happily ever after. So we could put that down there. Ended happily ever after. All right, some other elements that were in the story were magic. There's a fairy godmother, other magical thing, witches, wizards, things could be in your fairy tale. There were royal characters. So we had princes, princess, a king and queen. King and queen. What else? So setting where the story takes place. So a kingdom, an enchanted forest, or a spooky forest, something like that, okay? So setting. Enchanted forest. So maybe you could start out once upon a time in a kingdom, enchanted forest, a village, wherever you want your story to take place. You guys see this? A little hard to see, but I'll put it up ever. So one thing that can happen is good versus evil. So Cinderella versus her stepsisters or her stepmom. Good versus evil. Sometimes it's made up, so sometimes we have talking animals. Talking animals is one. So other unusual characters that we could find maybe are giants, witches, elves, what else? Dwarfs, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So other mythical creatures that can happen that might show up. Special powers, so that kind of goes with magic. And one last thing we can add is they usually have a happy ending. So they don't always have to have one, but they usually happy ending. So these are all the elements of a fairy tale. So what I want you to do, and I will put this picture on our Canvas page, is I want you to go to your daily writing journal. Now remember, if you are ready, have a daily writing journal. You need to go onto Google Drive to access it. Click launch and type in daily writing journal. So mine says Miss Kalina because that's mine. And then you have to start a new day. So remember today is 8-17. And you are going to try to write for 10 minutes. Try to write a fairy tale. So I would start once upon a time in an enchanted forest lived a witch named Gertrude. So then I would keep writing for 10 minutes, okay? So go ahead and do that. So that's your lesson for today, and try to write for 10 minutes.